Hi, I'm Catherine Phillips, Director of the Respect Life Office for the Diocese of Little Rock. Thank you for joining us today for this second part of our conversation about life and human dignity. If you missed the first session on human dignity and a consistent ethic of life, I encourage you to go back and watch the first video. Today, we're going to talk about the sacred gift of life, about how and when human life forms and attacks against early human life, and the very dignity of our youngest brothers and sisters that's not even recognized. Sometimes videos begin with a disclaimer, a warning about violent content or foul language that could be triggering or painful for someone. Today, we're going to be talking about procured abortion. And I know that for someone, this will be painful. But abortion needs to be spoken about, but always, always with God's love and mercy. So here's my proclaimer. God's love is bigger than any sin, and the church has a ministry, Project Rachel, that reaches out to women or to men, to anyone who has been wounded by abortion or had an abortion experience. We're going to show a quick promotional video for this ministry now.
I thought that my abortion was not the issue, but seeking help, the truth came out. I have joy in my life now and love.
There's hope, and there's healing, and there's the possibility of forgiveness. That's the heart of the ministry of Project Rachel.
We are forgiven, so let's move forward and not live in shame and guilt. That's not where He wants us. We were made for better.
If you'd like to know more about Project Rachel, we have excellent videos on our diocesan YouTube channel. Project Rachel, again, reaches out to anyone wounded by abortion, and we have healing opportunities in English and in Spanish. If this applies to you or you know anyone who this might help, please ask them to watch the videos on our Catholic Diocesan YouTube channel. Okay, so the beginning of human life. There's an egg or an ovum in a woman's body and sperm in a man's body. Through sexual intercourse, of course, between consenting spouses bound in the holy sacrament of matrimony, if the egg and the sperm unite, this is fertilization, and the very first moment that a new human person begins his or her life on earth. Now, this is not merely religious doctrine. This is scientific fact. Biologists, geneticists, neonatologists, embryologists, they all agree. Human life begins at fertilization when an egg and sperm unite. At that instant, a new human person is formed, and their genetic makeup is set. Their sex, male or female, is determined. If the sperm had a Y chromosome, the baby's a boy. If the sperm had an X chromosome, the baby's a girl. Now I want to take you along on the fascinating journey of early human growth and development. But first, I need to clarify a term. If you watched the previous part of this conversation, I'm sure you heard me say, life begins at conception. So what's the difference between conception and fertilization? Well, nothing really. But conception is not a medical term. And sadly, some people misuse it and use it to mean something different. So there's absolutely no room for error when we say fertilization. When we say life begins at fertilization, we mean that exact moment when two gametes, an ovum and a spermatozoon, come together to form a zygote. A zygote is the scientific term for the single-celled, newly formed, genetically unique human person. So what happens after the zygote is formed? Well, generally, this wonderful event has happened in a mother's fallopian tube. And now, this baby begins growing rapidly and slowly traveling to the mother's uterus. At that point, the scientific term for the baby is a blastocyst. Next, implantation occurs. This is when the baby snuggles into the mother's endometrium, or uterine lining. Here, the baby will continue to grow and develop, and this growing new human is now called an embryo. Now here's something confusing. Traditionally, when a doctor calculated a woman's due date, they counted back to the first day of her last menstrual period. So they said, okay, so fertilization occurs about 2 weeks after that. So a woman was 4 weeks pregnant, but her baby had actually only been living for 2 weeks. But today, many doctors and pharmacists commonly say that a woman is not pregnant until after implantation. That means that the mother wasn't pregnant for the first 1, 2, or maybe even 3 weeks of her baby's life. Confusing, right? And this new way of talking about pregnancy has dire consequences. So please hold on to that thought and we'll return to it. But let's go on with human development. Now, embryologists consider the time from the 14th day until the 28th day of a baby's life after fertilization to be the most interesting. During this crucial 2-week period, the central nervous system, including the brain and the spinal cord, the heart, the circulatory system, the digestive system, all begin to develop. The baby's eyes and ears and arms and legs are forming. By, on average, the 5th or 6th week of a baby's life, a baby's facial features are distinguishable. And by the 7th week, even though the baby is only about the size of a penny, little toes have formed. By the 9th week of life, a baby's genitals are often visible on ultrasound. And by the way, at this point or soon after, scientists begin calling the baby a fetus. The miracle of life continues, and God willing, a baby is born. Now, if a baby is born before he or she's fully developed or full term, we say the baby's premature. Advances in medicine have made it possible for babies to live and to grow and to thrive outside the womb at increasingly earlier ages, 28 weeks, 24 weeks, 21 weeks. Is there any question really that a baby has human dignity if they're born prematurely? Does being inside or outside of the womb really change that? Now, our common human experience makes evident that God's plan for human life is His own, not ours. Sometimes human lives are long. People live more than 100 years, but sometimes they're short. Sometimes lasting for only months or maybe even weeks or days. When a baby dies naturally very early in life, we say that the mother experiences a miscarriage. Grieving that loss of life, acknowledging the human dignity of that child is very important, but not often talked about. Our church does offer resources for grieving after a miscarriage and for honoring the life of the baby. The medical term for the death of a baby before birth is abortion. And that includes miscarriage, which is a spontaneous abortion. But that's not what we mean when we speak about abortion. We mean procured abortion, either surgical or chemical. And the sad reality is that people do intentionally kill babies before birth. It's estimated that 1 out of every 4 women will have an intentional abortion. According to the World Health Organization, 73 million babies throughout the world lost their lives to abortion in 2019. This is why we pray for an end of abortion. This is why the USCCB designates January 22nd every year as a day of prayer for the legal protection of unborn children. This is why we have a Mass for Life. This is why we partner with organizations that sponsor marches for life. Okay, now think back to that confusing way of talking about pregnancy and when it begins. If a woman isn't pregnant until after implantation, then pharmacists label pills like Ella or Plan B, emergency contraceptives, as not interfering with an existing pregnancy. The claim is that these drugs can't cause abortions. But you know what? That's not true. The way that these drugs act, and in fact, the very same way that many hormonal contraceptives act, is by changing the mother's uterine lining so that implantation can't happen. If a new baby can't safely implant, the baby will die. This is abortion, intentionally causing the death of a baby before birth. And by the way, the changing of the endometrium so that implantation is impossible, this is the mechanism of action of copper IUDs and some pills given in chemical abortion. I could talk for a long time about this. It's a topic that's not popular. It's information that's made intentionally confusing by obstetricians, by politicians, by pharmacists, especially the pharmaceutical industry. This conversation's already quite long, so I've included a link to a really good website where you can find more information. And I'm happy to answer individual questions if you want to contact me or even to come out to your parish and talk about this topic. But let me just remind you of that statistic. Approximately 73 million babies die from abortion every year. And this is not counting any baby that dies from that time of fertilization until after implantation is complete. Those very first few weeks of life. The magnitude and the reality of abortion is just staggering. And finally, for couples struggling with infertility, this disregard for the blessing of a baby can just be crushing. Be assured of God's unending love for you. I recommend the USCCB document 7 Considerations While Navigating Infertility. Here you will find hope and encouragement, but also from a practical and catechetical perspective, you can find links to church teaching about morally licit fertility treatments, interventions, which do not include in vitro fertilization, which involves the destruction of embryos. Respecting and honoring the human dignity of every person, even the tiniest babies still making their way to their mother's wombs, is a profoundly challenging message. Are we truly pro-life? Or are we merely anti-abortion after implantation? Do we really act like life is precious from the very first moment of fertilization?